Alright, peeps, on today's episode of The Kung Fu Genius, the genius will be discussing Yip Man's history with Jesper Lundqvist. Lots of gems, lots of exchanging, lots of, did you see that photo? That proves that Yip Man taught Napoleon. Let's get to it.
And every day, I practice martial arts.
Watch out!
All right, everyone, welcome to another episode of the Kung Fu Genius. Here I am with a special episode for you guys. Today, we have a very special guest, the first timer on the Kung Fu Genius podcast, Jesper Lundqvist, on historical issues regarding Wing Chun. Now, I consider Jesper the real encyclopedia of Wing Chun because he actually tries to apply proper historical methods, and he's a lot less, let's say, willing to make claims that other Wing Chun people will very easily make based on hearsay. But we've met a couple times. He was also a close friend to my late Sifu, Sifu Kanspei. So without any further ado, welcome, Jesper. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background so that people know why you might be specially qualified to talk about these topics?
Okay, well, my martial arts history is quite long and quite complicated, so I'll just make it very short and relevant to the topics we're going to discuss. I started martial arts in 1984 and discovered Wing Chun in 1991, 1992. And I've been a practitioner ever since. Over the years, I had the chance to learn from different people and different masters, and also in different lineages. So I have the most of my time I spent training in Yip Man lineage and U.S.A lineage. I started going to China in 2004, 2005, and then the next time was 2008, and then ever since I came to China maybe once or twice a year. And 13 years ago, I decided to move to China. And since I came here, I had the chance to meet a lot of different people and experience the skills of many masters and many different styles for myself. And so my wife and I decided that there is a lot of excellent Kung Fu here, and there's a lot of people who are interested in Kung Fu in the West. And we found that a lot of these people we met and these styles we encountered, and a lot of the information we heard is maybe quite different from what one can hear in the West. So we decided to try to create a bridge between the East and the West. And we started, we actually formed a company, which is we started doing this about 10 years ago. Then at some point we formed a company, an official one, to promote the traditional Chinese martial arts and, as I said, connect the East and the West. So this is what we're doing full time. As I said, we've been doing it for a number of years. Our work is just, basically promoting traditional Chinese martial arts, and
Awesome.
that's what we do all the time. So it's only my every day is just, of course, I train myself, but other than that, it's always my whole day is related to Kung Fu. In some way or another.
That's amazing. And for our listeners, they should know that your wife is Chinese, speaks both Mandarin and Cantonese, and she is like I've heard she's your secret weapon in all your research over there. And so I think it's important for people to know you have a very valuable asset on your side in terms of translation and everything, right?
Yeah, my wife is great. She's probably the one who knows most about Kung Fu of all the people I know, because a lot of our work consists of going out to interview people and to discuss Kung Fu with them. And of course, given that I would say my Chinese language skills are virtually non-existent, of course I know some basic stuff, but of course when it comes to Kung Fu I understand. But when it comes to sort of a certain level, beyond a certain level of conversation, I'm not very good, right? So I depend entirely on her. So she's doing a lot of work to transcribe things and translate things for me, so we can write articles and stuff.
Fantastic.
So Yeah, without her, it would not be possible to to do.
Very important to let everyone know that. So for today, because there's so much we can talk about, and for our regular listeners, uh, when I was in Hong Kong last year in the summer, you were very gracious and you came to visit for basically for a day, and we ended up speaking for like 6 hours nonstop. And if I had not needed to go somewhere else, if I did not have another appointment, I think we just would never have left that coffee shop. And so
Yeah.
I really appreciate the kind of people who can keep me silent for 6 hours while I just go with my jaw on the ground going, wow, this is really super duper interesting. And I really appreciate being able to learn so much. So I thought, why don't we have you on the podcast so you can talk about some of these things and our listeners can benefit? There's so much to talk about. So I decided, why don't we do an episode just on Yip Man, Yip Man's history, because that's obviously, especially for my listeners, very valuable. And then we can do another episode about kind of more historical topics about Wing Chun in general. But I figured let's start to talk a little bit about Yip Man, because obviously due to his popularity, there are a lot of people who have interest, but there's also a lot of misinformation that gets kind of thrown out and about Yip Man for years. And so now that we have more access to records, we have people like you who are over there who can kind of who have the time to sort through this stuff. Maybe we can get a clearer picture. So I wanted to first kind of talk about one well, I'm not gonna say it's an elephant in the room, but it's been a rumor on the internet since about the mid 2000s, was that after Grandmaster Yip Man came to Hong Kong around 1949, started teaching around 1950, that at some point he started secretly or on the side learning from some other martial artists who were in Hong Kong, namely those from the Siu Lam Wing Chun style. At this
Mhm.
place called Tai Dak Lan, which was like a poultry bazaar, and Yip Man would go over there, and that's where Yip Man finally learned certain types of footwork or certain types of hand techniques, which he then cleverly borrowed and put into his own Wing Chun. This has been a rumor for a while, perpetuated by a certain noisemaker. I don't know if he's still making those noises about Yip Man, but at some point he was very adamant about that. Is there anything you can say about whether Grandmaster Yip Man, we know that he knew the guys from Dai Dak Lan, but was he actually actively learning or exchanging with them? What do you know about this?
Yeah. Okay. So when we want to discuss certain things, I think it's always very important to establish the sources. So where does certain information come from, right? And so from the outset, we can establish that about that there is no written documentation. There are no photos. There are no videos. So when it comes to those things, it all relies on, or it's all based on hearsay, right? So um, um so where would you hear this from? Well, you would hear this from people who were present or told this to maybe later generations of students or friends or things like this. I want to say also, um, when we hear information, we also need to consider them in a, let's say, in context. So also maybe in a cultural context. And the cultural context is that if you are familiar with the Chinese culture, how Chinese people, how they socialize and what they do, then you will know that a lot of people uh, gather. They have these maybe social clubs, or they go to have tea or yam cha, or they go visit somebody's home, and then they just go there for socializing. And of course, kung fu people, what do they do when they socialize? They talk about kung fu. So I will relate this to personal experience I have here in Fatsan and Gongzhou and in other places. Even today, when you get together with people from different kung fu styles, you will talk about kung fu, but it's a mix. So it will be about some social events, or then suddenly kung fu, and then if there was a, let's say, uh, sometimes even today some guy would put up the videos. Hey, look at this video. What you think about this? And then you will start to discuss this. But it's not like there is any teaching or instruction or training going on, right? It's more like, okay, maybe you would, if the guy wants to show something, okay, you give them your hand and then they do something. It's not like you get up, okay, show me your form, and then I correct you if you are with peers, right? And this culture is an old culture. So when you hear about this at Land, from people who were there or who knew people who were there, what they're gonna tell you is that it was more of a social club than a place where there would be some kind where these masters would really sort of train together, like as in training. They would maybe discuss some things, but it's not really training and instruction. So where did I hear this from? Well, I'm the kind of person who, if I hear something, I will check where it comes from. I will try to find the sources and hear for myself what these sources actually say. And I had the chance to meet, and I like to say make friends with some of these senior Wing Chun people in Hong Kong. And what they seem to say is that they would say Yip Man was present, or he came there to visit and socialize, but it's not really any teaching.
Right.
And sometimes he supposedly brought his student Lok Yu with him, right? And Yip Man was he was friends with some of these Wing Chun masters because he knew them already back from Fat San. So of course he would come there and socialize with these people. They're in a let's say in a foreign place, and then of course they get together. People from the same city in a foreign place get together, socialize, to maybe talk about the old times and things like. So it's a most natural thing in the world. So the the gist of what you get from talking to these Siolam Wing Chun seniors there is that it was for socializing, basically. So no, not really teaching. Uh, the thing is, of course, we can say that if martial artists get together and they discuss things, they maybe they kind of inspire each other, right? So maybe they get some ideas from, but you can't call this teaching, really. It's like, oh, I just came up with a good example. When we were sitting there in Hong Kong and talking, and I was, we were discussing this at Sixth Ave and how to do things right, and I showed you some things and explained you some things. This is not teaching, right? This is not me teaching you anything. So it would be ridiculous for your student or for my student to suddenly say, Jesper taught Kung Fu Genius, his Kung Fu in Hong Kong. No, it's not. We were just, exchanging ideas and talking about stuff.
Sure.
And even though, let's say I try to explain some things to you about the Fat San Wing Chun, it doesn't mean that it in any way, shape, or form affected your personal kung fu or how you teach or how you do stuff, right? It's just, friends with a common passion getting together and talking about this stuff. That's it.
So 2 points I just want to follow up on what you just said, which was excellent. The context about the cultural context, I think, was very valuable because that may be something that's missed on some of the Westerners.
Yeah.
Just like you brought up the example of when we were exchanging, we're like, having coffee and then we're sitting in the chair and then you'll put your arm on mine and show me something, right?
Yeah.
And that's usually how I kind of understand a lot of these things because I've done that with masters even of other kung fu styles, right? Or you whip out the chopsticks and you discuss something about the pole or something like that, right? So that maybe that type of more social exchange is more what people are thinking rather than kind of hardcore teaching, which I think was an excellent point. Secondly, when it comes to the knives, I think that is one of the main points that was brought up by a certain noisemaker a number of years ago was that there was some footwork or there were some elements from Siu Lam Wing Chun that creeped into the Wing Chun Bachamdo or the knives. But as you mentioned, one, there was no actual knife techniques from Chu Chong Man. Two, there's a lot of hullabaloo about the special footwork in the Yip Man Bachamdo. And as someone who learned two versions of the Yip Man Bachamdo, I learned both the version from Sipu Chan Chi Man, who had learned it together with Wong Sun Leung. So it's a very old version. And of course, I've learned the Leung Ting version many years later. The footwork all comes from the stuff that we already have in Wing Chun. It's either the standard Wing Chun steps, or in the early period version from Chen Chi Man, there was some horse stance stuff, which is like the pole, but there wasn't anything like different about it. And I think that some of that stuff gets a little overstated over time, but it's interesting that you said that.
Well, I can tell in ours in Fatsan, when you do the knives, there is nothing new. Footwork, everything, you already learned that.
Yes.
There is nothing new. And it's not like you learn something which revolutionizes your kung fu, and no.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Did you so speaking of Wong Q and that connection there, because Wong Q, for people who don't know, was a very early period student of Grandmaster Yip Man. He was also relatively educated, as he was like a reporter, and he spoke English quite well. He moved to Europe very early on and was one of the pioneers of Wing Chun in Europe as well. Was also good friends with my late Sifu, Keith Kanspeck. But he did once tell a story online about Lok Yu getting into it with someone from the Siu Lam Wing Chun style. Now, it's kind of clear from the video who he's talking about. I don't necessarily want to bring that up here. Do you know anything about that incident besides that video? Have you heard about that from anyone else? Because there's a lot of, to talk about evidence, there's a photo of Yip Man, putting his hand on Chu Chong Man in a very kind of, caring kind of way, which I didn't read anything into. Some people are saying like, oh, do you see that gesture? Clearly, Yip Man was learning from Chu Chong Man or whatever. And when you know this story, or you've heard this story about Lok Yu maybe getting into it with one of those guys, you almost feel like maybe the context behind that photo is a little bit different. Did you hear anything about this?
No, I didn't hear anything about that, because I think now I'm not sure that because in Hong Kong there was another. His name was not Chu Jung Man, but his name was Chu Zhong. So maybe, I don't know if this was confused, because this Chu Zhong, he was a practitioner of a Wing Chun style. He had learned from a person called Lao Dat Sang. Lao Dat Sang was called Pao Fa Lin. So Chu Zhong was teaching Wing Chun even though he came to Hong Kong in the 40s, and he was teaching Wing Chun even before Yip Man came to Hong Kong. And that he named his style Pao Fa Lin Wing Chun. And I don't know exactly what happened there, but there were some
incidents.
Yes, there were some things which happened,
Mm-hmm.
and which made him sort of like withdraw. So even today, there are just two people who teach this Pao Fa Lin to the public. So it's a very, very small art, not practiced by many people.
Uh-huh.
So basically, there was some incident, and after that, Chu Zhong sort of closed the doors and kept it very private. So I'm always thinking, so this Chu Zhong, is it Chu Zhong or is it Chu Zhong Man? I don't know.
Was this Chu Chong? Was he this guy who he lived to be very old and he was very skinny? He almost looked like a super skinny Yip Man, like a very old and skinny Yip Man, right? Is that the guy you were talking about?
Yes. You can see he really has like a fire in his eyes, and voice is very strong.
Yes.
But that's a gentleman.
Yes. Yeah, it's quite possible that maybe there was some maybe someone thought that a story about this Chu Chong was about Chu Chong Man or whatever, right? That's very interesting. I never heard that before. Yeah.
It's possible. I don't know. It would be interesting to see the characters, wouldn't it?
Yes,
if
absolutely.
we had the characters, which one?
Right. The this
but anyway,
You had mentioned that this Chiu was teaching Wing Chun in Hong Kong before Yip Man, and of course, a lot of people kind of generally regard Yip Man as the first person to teach Wing Chun in Hong Kong, although we know that that's not actually factually true. Maybe he was just the first one to make it popular. But before Yip Man in Hong Kong, there was this Chiu Chong, and there was also, was Sam Lang from the Yuen San system already there in Hong Kong before Yip Man, or did he come afterwards?
Sam Lang
Yep.
was Sam Lang. He didn't teach in Hong Kong.
Oh.
He went to Hong Kong. When I say he didn't teach, so I heard some stories from various of Sam Lang's disciples
Mhm.
from different time periods. So from the very earliest, for example, Cao Gong, he's Pan Cao. He is was almost 100 years old, and he started learning from Sam Lang in 1946.
Wow.
So we had a chance to meet him and talk to him. And then people who learned from Sam Lang in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. And so what you hear is a lot of stories, right? So it can be sometimes a little bit, because the stories are not always consistent and the
Right.
details vary. So so there's a range of things that went on there. So Sam Lang, he supposedly went to Hong Kong at least once, and some people said that he wanted to migrate to Hong Kong, and Yip Man wanted to help him to establish himself there. But again, it's just stories, and then you hear stories. Yip Man and Sam Lang, they were not friends, and you hear all kinds of things. So it's very difficult to ascertain what really happened. But for sure is Sam Lang did not, even if he went to Hong Kong, he did not establish himself there. His style came to Hong Kong in the, I think, so he had three of his senior students who went to Hong Kong, and that must have been, I think, maybe in the 60s or definitely in the 70s. One was called Chiu and Lei Yu and Goan Peng. Goan Peng is still there. Lang Chiu passed away not too long ago. And the last one, I'm not sure if he's still alive. But they came there, let's say definitely. They were definitely there in the 70s. So, yeah. So they were not earlier. Yuen-Kei-san's style or Sam Lang style was not in Hong Kong earlier than Yip Man's.
Understood.
Yeah. But there was, there actually might have been people who learned Wing Chun who went to Hong Kong earlier, but nobody never ever heard about them because they didn't actually teach, other than perhaps maybe some, family or maybe some relative or some friends. So there might have been, we don't know. Supposedly there is this Wing Chun lineage in Hong Kong called Wing Chun, Snake and Crane style, and the family through which this is passed on, they migrated to Hong Kong in the should be, I'm not sure about the exact year, but sort of early 40s to mid 40s at the latest. So the people who practiced, there were definitely people who practiced Wing Chun in Hong Kong prior to Yip Man, for sure.
Hey, Kung Fu Genius fans. If you like what we do here, please consider supporting us on Patreon. For as little as $5 a month, you'll get early access to episodes and other goodies not posted on the Kung Fu Genius channel. With higher levels of support, you can get your name in the description, a live chat with me, or at the baller level, you even get your own personal KFG episode with me as my guest. The link to our Patreon page is in the description of this episode below. Patreons have a direct link to chat with me and get first dibs on any questions for Ask Me Anything episodes. Click on the link in the description for our Patreon page for more information, and I'll see you on Patreon. Excellent. So since we've already kind of slightly brushed the topic of Yuen-Kei-san, of course, the other topic of debate was the relationship between Yip Man and Yun-Kei-san, and perhaps the nature of their exchanges or the nature of, what was transmitted between the two of them. This is something I maybe want to go on a little bit more into our second episode, but I wanted to just ask you to keep it more about Yip Man here. If you could discuss what you know or what you've heard about what their actual relationship was like, if there was one. And if you could maybe speak about like how close they actually were, or if we can even know that.
All right. So the relationship between Yip Man Yun-Kei-san and Yun-Kei-san is, if you ask the people today what their relationship was like, everybody will tell you about the so-called three heroes of Wing Chun, right? So Yun-Kei-san, Yu Choi, and Yip Man. And it's a little bit difficult to find out where this term actually came from. Different people will say different things. And supposedly all of these people, they were friends. But of course, to what extent, who knows, right? I was always curious about how long or since when did Yip Man and Yun-Kei-san know each other, from what age? But this is not really, it's difficult to find out. It's not really possible. You can only guess. So people will have heard that Yip Man, he was from a rich family, and he grew up in a place called Songyun, right? But then, so this Songyun was a kind of it doesn't exist anymore today, but the area exists, and it's a kind of like a square with some trees and a playground on it. So this square, this is where this Songyun was. So Yip Man was supposed to be kind of like a neighbor to Yun-Kei-san's family there, right? And then you will hear stories say, oh, the Yun family owned the entire Songyun, or Yip Man's family owned this Songyun. So, but who knows, right? There are old pictures from Songyun there. You can see what it looks like, or what it looked like back then. And it's a quite different impression than what you get from when you hear about it. But anyway, if they were neighbors, okay, and given that, according to the official records, let's say like this, Yip Man and Yun-Kei-san are not too far apart in age. So some sources will say Yun-Kei-san was born in 1887 and or 1889, depends. And Yip Man was born in 1894. So they're not that far apart in age. So if they were neighbors, they might have known each other. But other than that, it's hard to say. Now, according to Yip Man's students in Patsan, Yun-Kei-san would often come to Yip Man's class and sort of just drop in. And then he would kind of like observe the class, and he would go around and make comments, or maybe even, correct students and things like this. And apparently, Lon Gai or Gofu, I'm not sure which one, or both of them, they told Lon Teng that when he interviewed them for his rules of Wing Chun, that Yip Man didn't want Yun-Kei-san to see the wooden dummy form. So he told them not to perform the wooden dummy form in front of the Yun-Kei-san. So what we can say based on this, I mean, if Yun-Kei-san did come to the class regularly, which was how to say, corroborated by Yip Man's students, then of course Yip Man and Yun-Kei-san, they must have known each other. Yeah, so definitely there was some level of friendship. But then again, when you hear the stories people say today, maybe there's also, we only hear the positive things, right? There might be some dark sides that we don't know about, or people don't like to speak about in public. So you don't know. there are all kinds of stories.
Sure.
So it's really, really impossible to say. But the really interesting question is more that the really interesting question is, so did Yip Man because the claim is that Yun-Kei-san taught Yip Man some stuff, right? And again, this is not a new story. This is an old story going back many, many years, many, many decades. And people always like to talk about, so again, evidence. What kind of evidence do we have? Do we have some textual evidence, or is all we have these oral stories? Now, Yun-Kei-san had a student called Liang Nao, and we also had the chance to meet Ngao Gong and did some interviews with him. And Ngao Gong, he also passed away a couple of years ago, almost 100 years old. He was, very, very healthy, and his mind was sharp as a knife still, until his passing. And he was always very clear and very consistent in his recollections of things. And Ngao Gong, he started learning from Yun-Kei-san in 1950. So in 1950, Yun-Kei-san dictated to him some things which Ngao Gong, he wrote down. So today there is Ngao Gong's notes, they still exist. So he wrote a number of pages with notes about the style. So it has a shielding, weapons, a dummy. It's described there in this. It has some kut and sayings and things. But on the first page, there is I wouldn't call it a lineage, like a tree, like an ancestor. I wouldn't call it that. It's more like a list of generations, because the way it's written, it's not clear who learned from. So, for example, it would say, okay, so the first generation is Feng Xiuqing, who was supposedly one of the teachers of Yun-Kei-san. And then on the next generation, you have Yun-Kei-san and Yun Zaiwan, Yun-Kei-san's older brother. And then the following generation, there are more. And among this list of people there is Sam Nang and Yip Man and a person called Wang Jing and others, right? So so it looks like it's not really clear, because there are no lines, like, who learned from whom. So it's not really clear. So at best, this is a kind of generation thing. But it's very odd, because a lot of these the names written there, they are actually, in other sources, they are listed as students of Feng Xiuqing directly, not of either Yun-Kei-san or Yun Zaiwan. Also, in that lineage, in Yun-Kei-san lineage, there's some articles written by Yun Zhou-tong, who was Yun-Kei-san's grandson, and he was a gentleman. We also had the chance to meet him and talk to him on a few occasions, and he gave us a copy of all the articles he had written. And so in those articles, he writes about the Yun-Kei-san's teachers, but the timeline he writes doesn't match up with Yun-Kei-san's older brother, because when Feng Xiuqing supposedly taught them, there is evidence that Feng Xiuqing, that Yun Zaiwan, the older brother, was already in Vietnam. So if you put all these things together, a lot of these stories seem very implausible, right? So, and also we need to keep. So some people like to say, yes, now we have something in writing. So it says there. So if we interpret it this way to mean that, okay, Yun-Kei-san taught Yip Man because he's a lower generation, if we presume that.
Right.
But then the problem is that, just because somebody tells something to someone and this person writes it doesn't make it true.
Right.
If I told you I was a student of Yip Man and you write it down in your books, and then 50 years from now, somebody reads it and says, Jesper was a student of Yip Man. No, it's not. It's not true. Just
Yes.
because I told you,
Yes.
right? So we cannot know. So even the written sources, we need to be very, very careful how we need to subject these sources to critical thinking. We need to contextualize everything. We can't just accept everything at face value, right?
Right.
So this is the how to say the textual stuff that we have. So there is this first page from Gong's writings. Other than that, it's just oral history, and again, it's very difficult to make sense of this, really.
Sure.
Yeah? So what we can then do is, or this is my I think the best way to approach it, and that is to look at do technical comparisons. So compare. So what kind of what material do they have? What are the concepts? How do they do stuff? How is it? How And if I would say, if you go back, so okay, Wing Chun nowadays is like this. It's a lot of things. There's a huge a variety of stuff which is Wing Chun nowadays. But if you go back in time, you'll see it sort of narrows down and it becomes more and more similar. So, and what you can then see is that in the 1940s and presumably earlier, the Wing Chun in Fatsan is all very, very similar. Right? So if you Yiu Choi, Ying San, Yip Man, and others, they have the same. It's kind of the same thing, right? So if we take these three heroes, so we can say, if we have Yip Man's transmission on one side, Ying San's on the other, and then the Yiu Choi one is kind of in the middle. So it's very similar, but of course each one of them have their own special characteristics, and so depending on what level you analyze it at, you will see that of course there are differences, but it's kind of same but different.
Sure. I think that's also like what's quite difficult and difficult to parse out when you're talking about this historical stuff is that, yes, if style A has something called tan sao and they do it this way, and style B does it slightly differently, and style C does it a little bit differently, then for some people they'll say, hey, look, they all have tan sao, they all have a basic movement like this, and other people will go like, yeah, but those technical differences make them so different from each other. So the problem is that it depends on the person explaining it, because for, as you know, in Wing Chun, people can, they can write 10 essays on the thumb position in Tan Sao, and other people will just say, hey, who gives a shit? It's all just Tan Sao, right? And they'll even look at the other Shaolin styles that may have a closed hand and say, see, it's all the same. And some Wing Chun guy may get totally offended that you think a closed fingered thing is the same as the miraculous Tan Sao. So I think the problem is that the language game is not always on equal footing when we talk about how similar and how different it is. And I think in our second episode, we can definitely get into some more of the older stuff and the differences and the development of this. I wanted to, since we talked about one semi-controversial figure in Yip Man's life, and I only say controversial because it's more about the degree, comes another one, which is the famous Lang Bick.
Yes.
According to one of many stories, the most common story, Yip Man comes to Hong Kong for some studying. Timeline of that we will do a special video for our Patreons on. But during this time in Hong Kong, when he was younger, this is before he came in 1949, he supposedly met this Lang Bick, who was the son of Lang Jan, and this Lang Bick taught Yip Man a more refined version of what he had learned before, or it was a bit of like a finishing school or polishing up, or insert whatever your take is on it, that this Lang Bick was kind of like a secondary polisher of Yip Man's techniques. Now, in the short time I've been doing Wing Chun, I mean, short time compared to other people, even compared to you as well, in, you know, the now 30s, let's say 30 years I've been doing Wing Chun, the pendulum has swung on Lang Bick back and forth. First, Lang Bick was accepted as this secondary teacher who gave Yip Man all this special stuff. William Cheung even famously used that to spin his own origin story. And then there was some point in the early 2000s where no, Lang Bick never existed. The character of Lang Bick was really a euphemism for Chu Chongman and the Siulam Wing Chun people, to now, like my friend Jim Rosalando, and I believe you as well, probably got the info from you. Oh, looks like Lang Bick actually did exist. And then to like, well, maybe he did exist, but he didn't teach Yip Man. So the thing is, like, this pendulum has gone back and forth, right? So for people who don't know about those controversies, can you just talk a little bit about whether Lang Bick existed? How do we know that he existed? And who, if anyone, did he actually teach Wing Chun to, if he taught Wing Chun?
Okay. Yeah, that is indeed an interesting question. But we can say for sure now. I don't know if, I mean, nowadays, if you are very much into Wing Chun, then you can even research it online. Of course, if you're here in mainland China, it's even easier. You can go to the Yip Man Memorial Hall in Luochun, and then you can find a copy of. You can't see it, but this is a copy of a page from the Leung family Chukpo, passed on from Leung Bick's grandson, Leung Man Lo. So Leung Bick is recorded in the Leung family Chukpo. We have personally seen 3 different versions of it from 3 different branches of the Leung family, and they are all, let's say, internally consistent. So he's mentioned in records. He has bloodline family descendants. Yeah. So Leung Man Lok passed. He was living in Hong Kong until recently. He passed away recently, but he has a. I think she must be Leung Bick's grandniece is still living here in Fatsan. So there is no doubt Leung Bick or Leung Bick was his name. He was a real person. He did exist. So there is no doubt about this. So this is the first thing. Now the other thing is, did he really teach Yip Man? Wow, that is. Then we need to go into a lot of speculation if he did. So what we can do is we can look at the timeline, or we can establish a timeline based on the information available. So I'm not going to tell people what to believe or not, right? And I'm not going to draw a conclusion. That people must conclude things for themselves. But basically, according to this Leung family Chukpo, Leung Bick he left Hong Kong in, if I remember correctly, in 1910. He passed away in Fatsan in 1911. So now, depending on when Yip Man went to Hong Kong to study, and if we try to take information from the various studies, the time Yip Man was in Hong Kong and the time Leung Bick was in Hong Kong is maybe at best a year or a year and a half, something like that. So theoretically, it might be possible that they had met. Might be possible that Yip Man had learned something from Leung Bick. So if you look at the timeline, but again, depending on exactly when in the year Yip Man would have come and when exactly Leung Bick would have left. So it's really difficult to say, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he definitely, it's impossible that he studied from Lang Bick for, 5 years or 7 years or God knows how. That's impossible.
Understood.
Yeah. So, and you will see that there are a lot of stories about that how he came to learn from Lang Bick and what their relationship was and how much time he spent and what he learned and things like this. So again, because these are stories and don't know how these stories sort of where they originated and how they grew and how they developed, it's all we can say is that again, based on the actual records, we can say Lang Bick was not old when he passed away. He was in his 50s. I believe he was 55 years old when he passed away, something like that. So not very old. He did have a family, so he was not living with Yip Man or moving in with the Yip Man, which, I mean, if you think logically, Yip Man is supposed to go to Hong Kong to study, so he's what, 15, 16 years old?
Right.
Again, depending on the story. So where does Yip Man live? And then does a 55-year-old guy move in with him to live? Especially when this 55-year-old guy has a family. I mean,
Sure.
is that logical? I mean, that's up to the individual to sort of consider.
Right.
Right? So this is what we can say about Lang Bick. Lang Bick is there is the Phật Sam Trinh Mộ had a monthly, what do you call this, a kind of like a journal,
or a newsletter, or
yeah, it was a journal they published on. I'm not sure if it was on a monthly basis, but it was published. And then at some time maybe in the 1920s, something like that, there was an article. There was a gentleman writing something about his father, and he mentioned that his father had learned from Lang Bick when his father was a young man. So that means that Lang Bick is already mentioned back then in the 1920s.
Interesting.
So yeah, it is.
Yeah, because I think
So
the story is that then, okay, I mean, in good faith, Yip Man was the one who mentioned Lang Bick. He mentioned him to some of his students as some secondary teacher. He's also mentioned in the first New Martial Hero interview, I think, maybe even the second one. But outside of that, it's a few of Yip Man's students and Yip Man in one or two publications talking about it. The interesting thing is, like, to be charitable to Yip Man on this topic, I mean, if Yip Man did not have some type of secondary teacher or someone else who taught him, it would seem strange to claim that he had then also learned from someone else. And for that person to specifically be someone like Lang Bick, who did in fact exist, I find it a little weird that he would maybe just pick some random person whom he maybe heard about and said, yeah, that guy taught me, not maybe knowing anything about what that guy did. But again, the problem is that it's still the interpretation of the data points that's the problem, because they're like little pieces here and there that we don't know, and we have to make little jumps, and those jumps may be the thing that is throwing us off the entire thing.
yeah,
So yeah.
Are you a Wing Chun instructor that needs some extra guidance in your own training? My private online Wing Chun training offers a multitude of benefits for instructors. Here are some of those benefits. 1, access to expert guidance, namely me. With my experience teaching instructors from all over the world, I can create a program just for you, whether it's the details of the advanced Wing Chun, something more fundamental, or just to help you create a program for your own students. 2, flexible learning. The training can be worked around your schedule and what's most convenient for you. I don't charge extra if you bring a training partner to do the lesson with you, so bring that partner and you can get more benefit, and I can teach the two of you how to train together. 3, comprehensive curriculum. Whether you want to teach in a more traditional way or you want to upgrade your material to a more modern style, I can help you create the perfect program for your students and for yourself. And 4, personalized coaching. This program will be exactly what you're interested in without any fluff or blah, blah, blah to run things out. We get right to it, and I want you to be happy with the improvements to your training and to the curriculum. Don't miss out on these incredible benefits. Enroll in online Wing Chun private training with me and take your Wing Chun skills to the next level. Use the code KFG online to get a 15% discount on monthly subscriptions for either 2 or 4 lessons a month. Use the link in the description below. Don't forget to use the code KFG online to get that 15% discount on the subscription of your choice as soon as possible. And I will see you online.
Yeah, but about that, the problem is, of course, that as anyone who has been studying this or following online discussions or through many years, the issue is that there was one of Yip Man's very early students who supposedly said that Yip Man had made up that story for marketing purposes based on a recommendation of Yip Man's friend Lang Bick, right? So they made up this story to promote Wing Chun and to elevate his position, right?
Yes.
Exactly. Well, and this is, of course, very, very common in martial arts, that you want to sort of elevate yourself by claiming to have connections with a higher generation. Because in Chinese martial art or in Chinese traditions, if you are the higher generation, the better, right? It's very important.
Right.
So a lot of people try to elevate themselves over their Siheng Dai in this way. And of course, that's why in traditional Chinese martial arts circles, it's really frowned upon when people do that. You know, when the student of a sifu goes to learn from the Qigong.
Right.
Wow, that's a bad thing, right?
Yes. I'm one of those people. Tell me, I know about it.
Yeah. So, but interestingly, if you ask some of the more like for example, the Gulo Wing Chun people, right? Gulo Wing Chun people, they practiced in their village. So who did they learn from? They didn't learn from just one sifu. They learned from from a father or brother or uncle or cousin, or and they learn from maybe from different people. So it's difficult to say that definitely they had one sifu. So maybe they had one in name, but actually they had a lot of different influences. And of course, if you're in a family, then you learn from your father, but you also learn from your grandfather. What's the problem? It's never a problem. It's natural.
Sure.
So going back to this Yip Man thing, what probably many will not know is that some of Yip Man's students, they will say that Yip Man, he talked to them about Lang Bick. So they heard it. Just because the first time the public heard about this was in that article, it doesn't mean Yip Man never spoke about this to his students, right? So some students will say, oh, he never told us before, but other students will say, no, he talked about this prior to this interview being published. Yeah. So did they say that because it's actually true, or did they say that because they want to somehow be a little bit, what you call this, apologetic, to
corroborate the official story, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, but here's the thing. So according to here in Fatsan, Bofu, he talked about Lang Bick already before. The first contact the Hong Kong students had with mainland China, with the Yip Man's Hong Kong students, the first contact they ever had with the mainland China students of Yip Man was in the early 1980s, right? So some people will say, the people in Fatsan, they had influence from Yip Man students. The issue here is that actually Gofu started teaching in 1950, and there is an unbroken transmission since for all those years up until. So you have, even today, I had the chance to meet some of the Gofu's very early students from the 50s and 60s and see how they do their martial art and what kind of stuff they do. And it's very consistent. There is not much difference from back then and then to now. Of course, there is some, but not much. And Gofu already, supposedly, again, is what they say. I don't know. It's just what they say, several of them. So they say Gofu already started talking about about Lang Bick prior to the 80s. So we can consider that also. Yes, but then we are back to the question. So why would Yip Man mention this if just pick a name and to elevate himself? Well, again, he might have tried to just speculating, right? He might have done this to sort of make himself appear, to elevate himself. But then again, this interview was very, very late in life when he was already established. So it would seem odd for him to suddenly start to put this out in the public.
Yes. I think that's the problem with the evidence, is that you hear these stories, the speculation sounds fine. Yeah, he wants to elevate it, make it seem like he's closer to a previous generation. Great. But the new martial hero interview came out in 71, 72. He dies at the end of 72. And if it was really made for marketing, then how come we don't see the mention in multiple publications early on so it gets out there? It's just like a whisper of his students until then. So it seems kind of weird that this grand marketing scheme would be something that he would do so late in life. Yeah, definitely.
But we never know. You never know. We can just guess and we can speculate and then come up with a what we think is most plausible based on the information we have and how we interpret it. It's impossible to say anything for sure. So that is a little bit frustrating for anybody who really wants to find the truth. Mm-hmm. Cannot find the truth. It's unfortunately impossible.
Right.
So you can just
so many and again the data points can be interpreted in any way so as to, someone who is favorable to Lang Bick can interpret the data points that way. Someone who wants to downplay him can interpret it that way. I mean, you said Lang Bick was most likely in Hong Kong from 1910 to 1911, which is not a very long time. And then he goes back to Fatsan, right? Did I get that?
No. Lang Bick was in Hong Kong for 20 years.
Oh, 20 years.
Like that. Yeah, he was in for about 20 years.
Okay.
But because they had business there in Hong Kong, he was taking care of business. So he left Hong Kong in 1910.
Ah, okay.
And passed away in Fatsan in 1911.
But I mean, for example, even that data point could be taken well, what if Yip Man learned from Lang Bick in Fatsan and then went to Hong Kong around the time he died and then just said, oh, it happened in Hong Kong? So, I mean, the problem is that it's everything is so inconclusive because it can be so flexibly applied to fit any narrative. And I think that's why when you have someone who's a bit of a snake oil salesman or wants to sell a certain style or wants to prop something up as being more historical, it's extremely easy to do because of the lack of specifics on any of these data points. You can really spin it any way you want.
There are no serious historians who would really make an effort to study Chinese martial arts. Why? Because first of all, it's a very niche thing. There is not much, there's not much money in it. There's not much. There's not many research grants and stuff like that in it. Another problem is that there are the sources. I mean, if you want to write good history, you need to have good sources, and they just don't exist for martial arts things. But of course, we can say that certain things are extremely implausible, right? Like the Southern Shaolin Temple. Yes. It's not very plausible that there was such a thing. Although, of course, you have people who insist, no, it's but but the reality is based on what evidence there is, on actual evidence. It's a hard sell, right? That this thing did exist. But when it comes to what would be interesting, though, is that if we knew what Lang Bick's kung fu was like, because in the Leung family record, it is stated that Leung Jan taught his sons kung fu. So Leung Bick definitely learned kung fu from Leung Jan, but it doesn't say how much or what or anything. It just said he learned this kung fu. And in the source from the Patsan Jingmo I mentioned before, it says that the father of this guy who wrote something, he learned from Lang Bick. So Lang Bick was also teaching something according to those sources. And so here's another interesting thing. This is purely anecdotal for what it's worth, but someone from Lang Bick's descendants, they met Sifu here in Fatsan, a local Sifu, one of the seniors. And this person said to this Sifu, the kung fu you do is kind of like what my grandfather did. His grandfather was Lang Bick. But then again, the issue is that he might just have said that. Sometimes when you give people face, you just say, yeah, it's exactly like that. So you how much can we read into that?
Sure.
So we shouldn't take that as face values, but we should sort of like consider this, because this Sifu, that Sifu here, he's doing let's say one of the local Fatsan styles, right? And there is actually there Leung Jan has there are several streams of his kung fu. So in the Western world, maybe you know about Fatsan Wing Chun. Okay, supposedly comes from Leung Jan, Chan Wa Shun, and then down to Yip Man. And then you have the lineages in Gulo, but there are others in different places, actually. So if you compare these others, it's quite interesting. So you have lineages in Vietnam and Guangxi and in other parts of Guangdong province. They are quite similar. They are all quite similar to the Gulo Wing Chun. Then they are not similar to Patsan Wing Chun, meaning similar. They are similar in the techniques and stuff, but they don't have Xiu Lim Tao Cham Pi Pi Ji, for example. So the question is, what did they learn? So it's unfortunately quite impossible to say.
Sure. Absolutely.
I want to say, as we drifted away from that before, I wanted to say, this picture of Yip Man with Ju Jung Man and holding his sleeve like this one, right? And then some people like to interpret this as, see, this is evidence that Yip Man learned from Ju Jung Man. But here's the thing. Now, I can tell you from personal experience, I have had many times over the years when we go to some of these the school celebrations and
banquets and everything. Yeah.
Banquets and stuff. I have the most senior masters grab me like this and grab my shoulder and lead me to the table and pull out the chair for me and ask me to come up on the stage and take pictures and stuff. It doesn't mean anything,
Yeah.
It's just they're just friendly. They're just polite. They're just showing respect. So if somebody is a host and you come to their place, they would do this kind of thing. So just to say that, see, this is picture. This is evidence that there is a teacher-student relationship, or that person learned from that guy. No.
Yeah, I think, and when people want to see that, then they are going to see that. It was interesting while you were saying that. It reminded me that 2 years ago, while working on a project in Hong Kong about Yip Man, Wang Kam Leung did an interview. He's a very good friend of mine. And then I did my interview after his. And afterwards, he just sat down and he says, hey, why you talk? Because he calls me about my Chinese name. Let's take a photo together. And he sat down and I was next to him, which looks a lot like the Sifu Todai photo. But we just took it there because we had just finished something. And now flash forward 50 years and people say, oh, well, secretly Alex Richter was learning practical Wing Chun because look at this photo here, right? And why would he be so close to someone who's doing a style differently? Like it's, I see it like, and that's in live time in the internet age. Now you paste this onto something 50, 60, 100 years ago where the evidence is less strong and the interpretation is much higher. It's so much easier. I think it's difficult, especially because the average person who's into martial arts doesn't necessarily understand about history, historical methods. You were talking about the sources, history is about the sources. We need to get, when you find a source, you have to go, okay, well, where did that source come from? If that source came from here, then you have to go to that one, right? And then you look at that source, and if that source came from, you have to keep going until you find the first and primary source. And I recently got a bunch of a bunch of comments on an older video I did where I talked about the Shaolin Five Elder stories, mythologized nonsense. And someone said, prove it's wrong. And it's like, first of all, the burden of proof is on the person making the claim, not the person disputing it. You make a claim that 5 elders escaped a burning Shaolin temple. You're the one that has to prove that that was true, not the other way around. And they go, well, it's written in Yip Man's book. And that's just like you said, because it's written down, people go, oh, see, it's written down. Yeah, but the fact that I, like you said, write something down that you just said doesn't now bestow this thing with extra authority, right? Because it's in black and white. And I think that's probably the most difficult thing to communicate to people who don't look into any of this stuff. It's like, the fact that something is written down in a book somewhere. I mean, Jesus, I wrote in my Siunamtao book, which came out 10 years ago. 10 years ago, the big thing in history was the stuff that Hendrik Santo was saying. And I put some of that stuff in my book, only find out it's all been debunked and it was all bullshit, but it's in my book. So therefore, and like the moment I can revise my Siunamtao book is the moment I'm going to take that stuff out. But I think that's in real time. I wrote something in a book, ended up not being true in terms of the history. I mean, it's only most of my Siunamtao books about the Leungting Siunamtao. So this much of it is about the history, but I put that stuff in there because that was the new updated stuff. And it's like, yeah, it was wrong. And the fact that it was in my book should not give that stuff any extra credence. Before we get going here. Yes, go on.
I got one thing real quick about this. Of course, I often discuss this kind of stuff with people because, sometimes when I have time, I will comment on certain things online, and I always get into some entanglements there because I will keep pushing people to say, okay, how do you know that? Where does it come from? How do you know? How do you explain this? And within one or two rounds, people will start to be very upset and offended and not be very. They will lose their countenance, so to speak, right?
Sure.
They will not know how to deal with this question. Of course, I don't do this because I want to be annoying or antagonist. I just want to know, where does it come from? How do people think, right? So when it comes to this evidence and these stories, I would say like this. Look, if you read the fairy tales of the brothers Grimm, right? And they write about Rumpelstiltskin, and you can say, oh, this was written in the 18th century, something like this. Oh, because it's written in the 18th century, and it writes it. So must be a real story. It must be real.
Yes.
Or unicorns are real or something. No, they are not real just because they're written down in an old book.
Right.
Or
even if that old book has references to things that are true, like we always say, the fact that Queens, New York exists doesn't mean that Spider-Man is real. And like, so I mean, it's that same thing, right? It's like, you can make fictional stories in historical places. You can take historical figures, put them in fictional places. Like that thing can be made any different way. And the fact that there's one or two it's in a certain time period or it makes references to things that actually existed doesn't now suddenly elevate this thing to, historical or scientific evidence. This has been really great. We have a special topic, which is only for our YouTube members and Patreon supporters. So if you want to get more of Jesper talking about Yip Man, join us on YouTube memberships or on Patreon. We are going to talk about something that is controversial only to people who know, and that is the real age of Grandmaster Yip Man may not be in fact what is commonly reported. We'll talk about that in a separate video. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to say goodbye to Jesper for today's awesome topic. We are going to have him back for another topic, which is about the history of Wing Chun in general. Don't worry, we're actually recording this next, so it's not like hold your breath. It's coming in 10 years. And then if you have any other questions that you have for Jesper or want me to do for a future episode of the Kung Fu Genius, if you like this kind of stuff, if you like this geeky, nerdy, historical stuff, let me know. Put it in the comments below. I can bring him back, even though it's always fun coordinating the time difference between New York and China. We still eventually get it done, and we can have him back for more of these kind of things, especially if you want stuff debunked that's been, making the rounds as far as Wing Chun goes. So thank you so much, Jesper. I really appreciate you taking the time. By the way, stay on, don't hang up. And we'll look forward to seeing you next time. All right, everyone. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Kung Fu Genius. As always, don't forget to subscribe to the Kung Fu Genius. Hit that bell for notifications. And if you want more super secret info, join us on YouTube memberships or on Patreon. And as always, I'll see you guys next time.
Word is I'm a kung fu genius. Technique speaks for me, not lineage. Forget Jet Li, cause I'm the one. Many call me seafood, but to you I'm sea kung. And I produce masters. You surpassed us. Your kung fu stiffer than corpse and caskets. City Wing Chun is the house I built. Violate the gate and your blood gets spilt. Alex, Richter, always the victor.